I'm old enough to tell you that this is my legacy piece. It has culture, it has heart, it has soul, it has future. To make a sculpture to represent this, I was breathtaken by the idea of doing it.
We were formed in 1984 by 125 survivors who made their homes in Dallas. And for 21 years, we were in the basement of the Jewish Community Center. It was the dream of the survivors and of the community to have a permanent home.
My father was one of the founders. It has become more than a Holocaust museum that's going to focus in on man's inhumanity to man, tolerance of others, and hopefully attract a large audience so that the horrors of the Holocaust and the horrors of all the other genocides in history can be discussed. About a year from now, around Labor Day of 2019, we'll be opening the museum, and I think it's going to be a tremendous success.
We want people to understand their ethical responsibility to stand up to prejudice and hatred in their daily lives. We knew we wanted to have a courtyard that was a place for reflection and contemplation after this heavy journey in the exhibit. And we had planned that, but we really didn't have a focal point.
David came to us with this really brilliant idea of placing I'll say a monumental sculpture in the courtyard. And when he mentioned it was James Surls, my ears kind of perked up. I was interested right from the beginning.
I really want my art to be part of nature's growth. I want it to look like it grew there as a natural thing, like it belongs in the world. The best compliment I can get, and I get it a lot, is, oh, it looked like it grew there. You know, I think, thank you.
He comes in with a pretty developed concept of what he wants to make. We get out soapstone, we draw on the table, and we, in a short period of time, decide how we're going to make something.
I make a model, a hefty model, by the way, not just a little paper thing, a real, honest-to-God piece of art that can then be scaled.
There are size limitations on what you can put on a truck and drive down the highway. So we have very much kept in mind those limitations with this piece. Because of the scale, this piece is borderline in terms of whether or not, as a whole, it will fit on a trailer and go down the highway.
Monumental outdoor stuff, there's not much flexibility in them. You have to think them through very, very carefully. You really can't afford to screw it up. It is devouring, and it's pulling you into it. There's so much work.
We refer back to the model, we decide what needs to be cut to what length, and we get all the components and pieces together, and we start assembly. Once we have all that stuff ready to go, and we clear out the studio floor and we're ready to start putting it together, that's really the fun part. His work ethic is one of the things I've always admired about James. He's always working. He's very focused on making art. He takes everything he does very seriously, regardless of its ultimate destination. This piece certainly has not been any exception. But it'll be interesting to see how it goes as we continue to build this piece and how it evolves and his relationship to it. That doesn't happen a lot with museums and artists. They're kind of co-evolving together, which is really interesting.
I love the natural elements in James's work. If you look at our building, we wanted to have a sense of nature. Copper is one of the oldest building materials, and it was important to us to use it because it changes with age. You know, it feels like it's been on a journey. And I think James's work evokes that too. You know, it's beautiful, but it's rugged. And I think that reminds me of the survivors. David is the child of survivors. His father and mother, they were two of those 125 survivors who opened our first museum. And David, as their son, was involved from the very beginning.
I first got involved in the late 60s. When I was at SMU, I was dating a girl that was in the film school, and I don't remember whose idea it was. We ought to be taping testimonies of our survivors. And we did. What motivated me was that my mother found it impossible to talk about her experiences. She had seen unconscionable things, and she had seen horrific things. Then my dad, it took him years and years and years, and it was really only until my dad and the other co-founders just said, why don't we have something in Dallas?
David was actually the one that recruited me to the board of the Dallas Holocaust Center. It was a very sort of tiny space, but we brought something like 25,000 school kids through that place every year. We were at a point where we could not bring any more in, and we realized that we needed to build a new museum to be able to take hundreds of thousands of kids into this place.
The interest that I have in teaching the Holocaust is real simple, is that our family holidays are very simple affairs. Never knew my grandparents. My eldest brother, Jack, was actually born in a Russian work camp during the war, so he's the youngest Holocaust survivor in Dallas. My mother and one sister and my father escaped the ghetto, and those were all the survivors of two huge families.
David Bell is a friend.
Come over here, David. I got to show you. James, I'm just lucky to be walking in your shadow. Yeah.
David had family members. They were victims in the Holocaust. So he had a long history, a deep family involvement in a message to the future. So I want this thing to be serious. I want it to count. I want it to carry something forward. I think that's exactly what the museum's trying to accomplish. I was not given a parameter. I was not given an assignment other than make what you think it should be. Thank you. There has to be some serious trust there. If the sculpture turned out horrible, it's my fault. I can't blame anybody. It's going to work. I feel it. I know it. I feel it in my bones.
James has what we call a Yiddish neshama, which means a Jewish soul. The idea that you have to find a Jewish artist to express a universal concept never occurred to me. What was and is important is someone that is spiritual, that could communicate a horrific set of events and then create this memorial. What I envisioned was something that reflected the terror and the brutality of the Holocaust, but then asked him to create a piece that would reflect hope. James has done that in a really thought-provoking way.
I didn't really want to make a piece of art about barbed wire, about the death chamber. We can't forget that. We can't take that away. We have to carry that as a cognizant reality into the future. Art is a healing force. I want it to be a relief. I want it to be a breath, a release. I want it to give just some kind of solace. Robert Creeley wrote a poem, so simply vast, placed in this space everywhere. I took from his poem and made a title out of it, This Place Everywhere. This place obviously means here, now, under these circumstances, in this time, in our being. Everywhere, on the other hand, sends it as far out into the universe as it can go. So this place everywhere, I thought, man, what could be a better title than that? I really want it to be about life and about future and about possibilities. I wanted to bring people in a focused way, and I wanted to send them out in a mind's eye way.
James's work comes from a real deep part of his own kind of belief and his place in the world, and family. He comes from a very kind of salt of the earth kind of background. I mean, he grew up on a small farm in East Texas with the non-artist types.
I grew up in a place where, I was running through creek beds. I was walking through the forest. I was running across a pasture, rural East Texas. It was a great place to conjure as a kid and as a young adult and as just a person. I'm not looking for nature. I am it. So it is then part of me. So what I do has to have that natural path to follow.
The way he conceptualizes what he does and the way he verbalizes what he does, it's not hung up on a lot of terminology and jargon that a lot of contemporary artists like to use. He really communicates well with other, just regular people that don't know a lot about art very easily. The way he talks is very literary, kind of just off the cuff and from a deep place. I think that's one of the reasons he's so successful and why so many people like his work is because it's just so accessible.
I have been called a Texas artist. I've been called a Colorado artist. I've been called a regional artist. My conclusion is it's really like I am an American artist. I am the child of someone who grew up in the Depression. So working hard, it just was inherent. It was built in, it was baked in the cake, so to speak. I got rewards early, a pat on the back, a smile, kind of a blessing from someone for making some toy thing that was creative. My dad's friends nicknamed me the Wizard for that reason. So making something has always been there. I never called it art until I was a senior in college. And I went through a development period there as a young adult where art was not in my wheelhouse. But then I realized it was my wheelhouse. And I used to say every time I made a piece of art, I was putting my head on a chopping block. It's almost like a percentage of reality will be that more people will not like it than do like it. If I can bypass that, and say, hey, thank you very much. Here's what I do, okay? And then be true to that. Well, I think I am true to that. I think that is part of what I do. I think my art looks like my art because it is my art.
In the whole narrative of contemporary art and art history, he's kind of carved out his own place. And I think it's an important place when historians and critics look back. They'll look back and they'll recognize James as an important part of all that, and yet kind of distinct from all that.
Making the piece for the garden in Singapore for their 50th birthday, that was a huge deal for me. I liked putting something at the gateway of the world's greatest orchid garden, next to the Nelson Mandela tree in a UNICEF site, where millions of people walk through this beautiful, beautiful garden. And there's my sculpture. Doesn't get much better than that. But this is a whole different ballgame.
I know that this piece is very important for him because it's going to a place that I think represents something that is very important to him. And I think it will be remembered as one of the more significant pieces in terms of his legacy.
I've tried to take this one out of the realm of just saying, oh man, it looks great. But it's really more than that. The Holocaust, what it means, what it represents, what the sculpture is, what it means, what it represents. I think it's all a paradox in a weird way. You're taking one of the most god-awful events of history, and you're trying to make it where someone can have a breath from it. That is a paradox, it is. I feel real good about this piece and about how it kind of holds together as you move around it. Once it's there and once it's in, I personally think they're going to love it. They've been working real hard to make sure that the world loved it. Making this sculpture for the Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, I always hope for the best, but I will tell you, if lightning strikes me the day after the opening of this thing, I can say, man, I had a good one. And I think it's in a setting that will be conducive for a connection. In describing the piece, I describe the core in a very scientific way. There are 3 prisms arranged in the core. There's 3 prisms, 6 ends, 3 points times 6, there's 18. And the number 18 in the Jewish lexicon of thought is life. There's 18 eyes. The piece is sitting on 3 eyes. Vision is what's holding up the thing. There's 3 eyes on top in a mirrored fashion, so that the 3 eyes on top are reaching up. So there's eyes holding, eyes reaching, and then around the perimeter are the rest, 3 from each end of the triangle. And then the flowers come from the center. If you put them together in a configuration, it makes the Star of David. If you just simply outline it from point to point to point to point, it makes a hexagon. So now the hexagon is what takes you into what I would call the building blocks of nature.
When it was delivered, shipped down from Colorado, I was in awe. I just couldn't have imagined how perfect it would be for that space. It changed the courtyard.
A sculpture like that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. And I'll leave it for any visitor to the museum to derive their own emotion out of it. But it is a piece that will stimulate an emotional reaction, I think, in the context of the experience that they will have had in the museum.
I look at it and I see life and hopefulness. The eyes look towards the future and towards the past, but the flowers symbolize rebirth. And that's something that I think is so inspirational about our survivors, that they could experience what they went through and still be hopeful and resilient and, loving. And to me, that's what the sculpture represents.
What I'm feeling emotionally is the fact it's dedicated to my parents. And down the road, my grandchildren will see this beyond words. I was born in Poland. I know very little about back then. My parents never spoke of it. It was just too hurtful for them to remember their family. I think of my parents and what they went through. I think of my aunts and uncles that I never knew. It's just overwhelming. This is my first time in the museum, but it's phenomenal. I mean, this is a community effort. When all is said and done, we're proud of what we've accomplished.
James Surls. James has made me what I am today.
I wanted this piece to be something that had reverence for the future, something that would give hope for the future, something that would tell the story of the future for us all, for humankind. That's what we owe our children. That's what we owe your children. That's what we owe everyone's children. Thank you very much.
There's almost no words to describe the feeling that all of us who have been involved in this project for so long feel. The survivors who are still with us today see this museum as the sort of culmination of a dream that they never thought they would ever live to see.
From the early 70s through today, I've been a witness to how much we've accomplished. Teaching the Holocaust and educating people, those are the things that survive us all.
The human rights violations going on in the world today, even in our own community, in our own state, in our own country, there's no question but that we have a message that we need to deliver to these kids. These kids are not born with hate. They learn it. And if that's the case, we ought to be able to teach the opposite. We can create generations of school kids who understand what it means to be an upstander and not a bystander, to know how important it is to speak up when you see something that's not right. Then we'll know that we had a success.